At the end of the day, this is what your Tug-o-War circuit board should look like. To build your very own circuit board, you're going to need the circuit board itself, a diode, the integrated circuit socket for an AT-Tiny84. You're going to need a switch and some buttons. You'll need two buttons actually, so two buttons. You'll need 7 red LEDs. So there we go. You'll need 1 green LED and a buzzer. This part's optional, but I recommend you put it on because it just gives you another fun thing to program. And of course you'll need the battery holders. So the first step is to put on the diode. You can see that the diode goes right up here, so on the back side I'm going to put a little bit of flux on the holes that the diode's going to go through, right here and right there. And then I'm going to bend the diode really sharply. So bending a real nice 90-degree angle on that diode. And I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. Some people like to push it against the table. That's actually what I normally do. So you just grab it and you push it against the table really hard. I'll push it against the circuit board so you can kind of see what I'm doing. And just push it just like that. And that gives you a really nice sharp bend. So when you're all done, your diode should look just like that. Now, the polarity of the diode makes a difference. That means the direction the electricity flows through it. So we have to put the diode into the circuit board correctly. If you look closely, you'll see that there is a green band on both the diode and on the silkscreen sketch here of the diode on the circuit board. So we need to make sure that the gray bands here line up. So I'm going to put my diode through those holes. Whoops. I'm going to push it all the way through. I want it to be all the way down so that the diode's right against the circuit board, just like that. And then to keep it in place, you can just bend these leads a little bit, and that'll keep it from falling out. Once you've done that, it's time to solder. For this project, you only need a soldering iron, some flush cutters, and your flux pen. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and snip those just so they're not in the way. I highly recommend, I'm going to let mine kind of fly off, but I'll show you the correct way to do it just once here. I'm going to hold this in my hand so that it doesn't shoot off like a little bullet. The rest of them I'm going to let shoot off because there's nobody else in the room here and I'm okay with that. But you don't want to let yours fly off. I have to let the rest fly off because when I videotape it's a little hard to fit everything underneath the camera here. So I've got my diode in place. The next thing I'm going to put into my circuit board here is the integrated circuit socket, this piece right here. So it's going to go right up here, and if you notice there's a little notch in the end. The notch needs to match the notch that's on the silk screen here. Before I do that, I'm going to flux the back side. So, getting my flux pen, just one stripe down here and one stripe right down there. That'll make soldering go a little bit easier. Make sure the pins line up. You don't want to just jam it in there. See, if you look closely, you can see one of those pins is bent. So I'm going to have to pull this out and bend that pin back into place and then try again. Now it fits just fine. The reason I'm doing these items in this order is I'm going from the things that stick out most on the circuit board to the things that stick out least. That way I can just kind of push down on the circuit board and it'll hold things in place. Some people like to use a little bit of tape to hold things in place. You can do that too. It's just on this little board it's a little bit tricky to use tape, but here's how you would do it. On this piece, the best way to hold it in place would probably be to put the tape vertically, because otherwise it would have to wrap around the edge here. So I got tape holding that socket in place, and now I just solder each one of these pins here. Make sure that your iron's touching both the pad and the pin. So the next thing to put on is the switch right here. And this doesn't matter which direction it goes in, it can go any way. And I'm going to go ahead and use some tape to hold that thing in place too. You're going to have to hold your circuit board up just a tad, and then put it in there. Make sure it's not leaning to one side or the other. If you look, I can see that the pins are perpendicular to the board. That's what you want. I'm going to put a little bit of solder on the tip of my iron just to help transfer the heat a little bit. The next thing to solder onto our board are some buttons. I'm going to put a button right here. It's labeled BTN for button. And I can actually just push down on the board here if I want to hold it into place, in place. If you're not confident in doing that, go ahead and use tape. And you know what, I'm going to actually use tape because I want to do a good job. So I got my tape here. See it holding down the button there. And then it's almost like having a third hand. Using tape makes it just a little bit easier. Should look like that when you're done. Put the other button in over here. I'm going to put some flux on those holes before I put the button in. I think I forgot to do that last time. Some tape on that to hold it in place. One side of the button solders much easier than the other, and that's because this side right here is attached to ground, and so it dissipates, or the board actually absorbs a lot of the heat from the soldering iron, making the solder not quite, it's not quite as liquidy as it is on the other end. There we go. At this point, I think I'm going to clean up the board a little bit with my flush cutters and just clip all these things that are a little bit long. I'm clipping them really close to the board, but not perfectly flush. Again, you should be holding these with your hand when you clip them, or do it face down over a trash can so when they shoot off, they don't shoot off like little bullets and hit one of your classmates in the eyeball. If you cut too close to the board, you'll actually cut this little piece of copper off, so you want to make sure that you're not cutting too close. Clean these up a little bit here. Next, it's time to put in the LEDs. I'm going to go ahead and put in a red LED first, and when you put in the LEDs, you have to put them in the right way. We need the long lead to go into the hole with the plus sign next to it. So I'm going to put this long lead right next to that positive sign, and I'm going to push the LED all the way through so that it's flush against the board. I don't want any room between the board and the LED. Now, to hold it in place, the easiest thing you can do is just bend these leads apart, or you can just push down with the board on that, and it'll kind of push that LED against the board. Every time you put an LED in here, I recommend you put it in and then you clip the leads so that when you put in your next LED, they don't interfere or get in the way. Again, make sure that the long lead goes into the hole with the plus sign. Once you get all of your red LEDs soldered into place, it's time to get your green one soldered into place. And the green one's going to go right here, right above the red middle LED. Once you've taken care of all of your LEDs, the next step is to solder the buzzer into place. Now, I don't have a plus sign indicating the polarity, the polarity for the buzzer here, but it does matter. So I'm going to tell you right now that the buzzer's positive side should be connected right here, and the negative, or the ground, gets connected right here. If we look at the buzzer here, you'll see that it has a plus sign on one side, and on the back side you'll also see a little plus sign right here, and it's a little hard to see there, and then a minus sign right here, but the plus sign is a lot easier to see. So just make sure the plus sign, this pin right here, needs to go through that hole. I'm going to go ahead and twist it again so that the plus sign's lined up, and I'm going to put it right, I'm going to do it sideways here so you can see me doing it. Got my plus side lined up with that on the circuit board, and I'm going to put it right through there and just flip it right over, and if I push it straight down, it holds it right where it needs to be. I'm going to clip both of those. Okay, so all of the electronics are on our circuit board, but now we need to add the battery clips. To get the battery clips in here, we need to make sure that they get soldered to the back side of the board. That's kind of the most important thing. And you just push them right in here. Now, if they don't want to snap, oh, that one snapped right into place. Perfect. If they don't snap into place, you might need to get some pliers and kind of bend the ends a little bit. But otherwise, if you just kind of rock them back and forth here, they go just right. Now notice that the tab here is on the outside of the board, and this tab here is also on the outside of the board. If you solder them, if you reverse that, you're going to have some problems. So you want it to look just like that. Now that I have all of those put in place, I can just flip it over, and I need to put solder on each one of those connections. So I'm just going to start in, see, this corner's over here, I think. It's going to take a lot of solder. There's a lot of area to cover there. Now I'm going to twist it around so I don't have to reach over my components. You don't want to have to reach like this to get those components because you'll end up burning them. You want to make sure you're soldering from the outside. So now I'm still reaching these components, but from the outside, and I'm not having to reach over anything. When you're all done, your soldering connection should look something like that. I think I put a little bit more than I needed to over here. These ones here look pretty darn good. So, to insert your batteries, you need to make sure that the negative side of your battery here, if I look at this battery, you'll see that there's a negative sign right there. It needs to match the negative sign on the board here, and then the plus sign on the battery matches the plus side on the board. So it's going to go just like that. And the plus side has that bump on it, right? And then I'm going to do the same thing with this battery. This battery's seen better days. Again, the plus sign matches up with that plus sign. This minus sign matches up with that minus sign. And, whoops, just push it right in there. And then to insert your socket, you just need to make sure that it's lined up. So if you look closely, you'll see there's a little notch in the IC circuit socket, the integrated circuit socket, and then there's also a little notch in the integrated circuit here, the AT-Tiny84. Just make sure those are both on the same end. And I'm gonna do this really carefully so you can see exactly what I'm doing here. I'm gonna actually grab it with my little integrated circuit holder so I can really show you clearly what I'm doing. You don't need to use the socket holder when you're putting stuff in. Usually you just use it when you're pulling stuff out, but for now I'll go ahead and show you. So I make sure those pins line up just right. And then I also need to make sure they line up this way too. I don't see any pins kind of going in or out where they're not supposed to be. It's a little hard to see here with a little bit of that shadow. My lighting's not the best, but I don't see any pins that are outside of those holes. So if I make sure all the pins are lined up, then I just push that in, and it looks just like that when I'm all done.